is James, and I'm here with the Oracle Outlook for the week starting January the 8th, 2018. This week I wanted to break my streak of working with playing card decks, and I was prompted to work with Lenormand this week. Specifically, I wanted to work with the 1889 Lenormand Oracle. It's by Jennifer Cast of For the Seekers. So I have the deck on hand, and I'm going to take a few moments to shuffle the cards. And as I shuffle the cards, I'm focusing on my usual intention and question for these weekly readings, and that is, what do we need to know for the week ahead? I'm feeling that will do it. I'm going to go ahead now and cut the deck. And fan out the cards. And I'm looking for 5 cards to do a line of 5. So I'm just looking for the 5 cards in the fan that are getting my attention. We have 4. We're looking for the last card. I'll go with this one. All right, so we have the 5 cards selected. And I'm putting the remainder of the deck to one side. And so when I work with a line of 5, I always look to the middle card first. For me, the middle card represents the central issue being shown, or what we're being asked to focus on for the week ahead going forward. So taking a look at the card, here we have the house. So the house is a card that can represent things like one's home life, one's personal life, one's family life. I tend to look at house as this idea about foundation, keeping with the idea that we're only the 2nd week into a new year. This card could be about laying a foundation for something to build on, because houses are on foundations. So I see that as a meaning for the house card. So for some of us, we're being asked to take a look at things that are going on in our own homes, our own personal lives. And that could include family, because house is a family card. It could also be about maybe relationships that you're having with people that you share living space with, because aside from family, when the house card comes up, for me it represents everyone who lives under the same roof. So it may not be that you are sharing living space with people that you are actually related to by blood. It could be a roommate situation, some other kind of configuration, but it would be anybody who shares living space or lives under the same roof with each other. So for me, one of the personal meanings that I have for this card, as a business person, I work from home. So sometimes for me, house can represent having a home business, you work from home, or a home-based business, or even a family-owned business. Now, because the house is a smaller structure than a larger building, sometimes I tend to look at this as like a boutique or a retail shop, or the idea of like a mom and pop shop. Back in the day when I was younger, we used to call those mom and pop shops. So that would be a smaller type of business. So those are all things to keep in mind with house. Another thing about house can represent this idea about comfort, and so it could be just at this point in time, what are you doing in your life to either create or seek comfort? That would be another thing with house. House also, for me, going with the idea of being comfortable. Sometimes house can represent, for me, like being comfortable with who you are as a person. If you go with the idea, metaphorically speaking, that the body that you live in is like your house. We call it in spiritual circles your body temple, right? So if you go with that, then house can represent like, how are you becoming more comfortable with who you are, right? So those are all things that I attribute to house. So now we'll take a look at the surrounding cards, because the surrounding cards will give us more information about this central issue. So taking a look at the card starting on the far left, we have letter. Okay, so letter is a card for me that comes up when there's a need to look at either paperwork, documents, documentation, written correspondences, because this is a card of news and messages, but letter specifically talks about things in writing or things in print. So now if we pair house and letter, or letter and house going with the order, then this could be something having to do with paperwork or documentation around one's home, or personal paperwork or personal documents. So for someone this week, it may be necessary to go through paperwork documents that are around the house, or even looking at something having to do specifically with your house. Now, since this is the beginning of a new year, I know some of us may be focused on, things having to do with tax preparation around mortgages and things like that. So there may be an actual need for that to go on, starting to get those kinds of things in order. I tend to look at house in that regard as like, what do you need to do to get your house in order? So for someone specifically with the pairing of letter and house, there may be something having to do with housing documents, housing paperwork, things having to do with mortgage. I'm thinking because of the time of the year, it's about taking a look at mortgage payments in terms of taxes and things like that. So that's how I would look at the idea of letter and house as a combination. So now let's take a look at the card in between letter and house. And so we have here, there's no mistake, you can't make this stuff up. Okay, so here we have the whip, or in some circles this is known as the whip and the broom because there's one of each on the card. I tend to read it as just a whip. So the whip is actually just this thing that I was talking about. Whip for me in the context that we're talking about, this is about working things out or sorting through things. So the actual idea here about the combination of letter and whip could actually be this idea of sorting through paperwork, sorting through documents, that kind of thing. And then here's the thing with whip. Whip represents either one or two things. Either we're doing it because we need to clean things up, and then the combination of whip and house could just represent cleaning house, getting my house in order like I've been talking about. So there is that. But whip could also suggest that this is going to be something that's a repetitive activity. So somebody may be clearing out, going through things, cleaning things up, and it may be a form of repetitive activity, meaning like we're not just going to do this once. And that could be like, you may be doing it a room at a time in your house. You start with one room and then you get that room done and you move to the next room, and that's another way of reinforcing this idea of repetitive activity. So there is that. Now, in another context, in another situation that I'm seeing, if we pair whip and house, then we may have an argument in the house. We may have a family argument. We may have a family conflict. We may have a family strife that needs to be worked out and sorted through. And then whip in that context could be about like heated words being exchanged. This for me can represent anger, heated words, arguments, debates, things of that nature. So there could be something having to do with that, and we're needing to work through that and sort through that. Now, with the letter coming before it, it could suggest like the argument comes after some sort of written correspondence, some sort of written communication, some sort of paperwork or documentation, that kind of thing. Because going with the order, first it's the letter and then comes the whip. So it would be like as a result of whatever this message is, it kind of brings about this sense of conflict, strife, argument, so forth and so on. Or it could be as a result of maybe we're getting a heads up, like be very mindful of what you put out to other people, especially in text or in an email, because you don't want to have to clean it up after the fact, right? It could be saying too, like it's better to clean it up before you send it than after, right? So I'm seeing that with a possibility. So with the whip, I'm going to go with the more metaphorical thing, like we're being encouraged to kind of clean house. And one of the ways that we may be called to do that may be going through old paperwork, old documents, things that we no longer need, and then clearing those out. And it could also be too, for somebody in particular, there may be something having to do with paperwork around housing that needs to be sorted out, worked through, that kind of thing, because there may be some sort of conflict or debate around that. So that is whip. So now let's take a look at what's on the other side of house. So on the other side, okay, again, you can't make this stuff up. So here we have the fish card. So for me, fish is the money card, right? So there may be something having to do with money, money connected to a house because it's following house. And then here's the thing. I talked about whip being about a conflict or a strife or a possible argument, right? So here we have maybe what the argument is about. We have an argument that may be about money, right? Because pairing whip and fish could represent a financial conflict, a financial strife, needing to work out or sort through something of a financial nature, that kind of thing. So there may be something having to do with that. And that, again, that would reiterate what I was talking about with this idea about maybe property taxes, something having to do with the mortgage, that kind of thing, and needing to sort that out because money's involved, right? So there is that idea here with the idea of whip and fish as a pair, because there may be an argument that is around money, right? That kind of thing. So now let's take a look at the final card rounding out the line. And here we have, so here we have the ring card. So ring for me is a card that can represent commitment, it could represent agreements, it could represent promises, things of that nature. So here we have with the idea that ring could represent a contract, an agreement, a promise, with the letter mirroring it on the other end. Then here we have the possibility of a written contract, some sort of agreement in writing. It could also be too with ring in that regards. If we're talking about paperwork and documentation of some kind, then ring could suggest something that is cyclical or recurring in nature. And I say that because the ring is a band that doesn't have a break in it. So it could just represent something that's circular. So I play off on that with something being cyclical or something that's recurring. So here we may have a recurring agreement or contract, but something that is in written or document form, and it centers on a house. So for me, I'm thinking, and taxes, property taxes, are something that is cyclical in nature. So for me, this whole idea, I think like for some of us, we are starting the process of looking at paperwork, documentation, property taxes, mortgage, things of that nature as we are preparing to have our taxes done. And I think that is going to play a big part of what goes on for a lot of us this week. Now, for some of us, if it's not that, then there may be a conflict or a strife that is either family oriented, centers on the family, or something that is close to home that we are needing to work through and sort out. It may be something of a financial nature going with fish, and then with ring at the end, it may come to a way of sorting through things is that somebody is going to make a commitment, make a promise, and then it's all about honoring the commitment and keeping the promise. So I'm seeing that because ring comes after fish. So in order to resolve the conflict, potentially, there may be a need to work something out and make some kind of promise or agreement, and then it's just a matter of keeping that. So the one thing that I want to say as I'm looking at the cards, and I'm looking at the playing aspects of the cards. So now here we have opening the line up. If I read the playing cards just as maybe a secondary message, the 7 of spades is on the letter card. So the 7 of spades for me represents a setback or some kind of stagnant situation, something that we're seeking some improvement around, right? We're trying to resolve a problem, trying to improve it. And then we move on to the next 3 cards, and the very interesting thing about the next 3 cards is that they are all face cards. So this could be, again, this idea about a situation that's going to involve more than one party, because on the whip card, we have the Jack of Clubs. Jack of Clubs is a card that can represent news or messages. I tend to look at that as jacks. And then the clubs could represent this idea of maybe working through something, because this card, Jack Clubs, is the suit of work or business, but also about wanting to see something progress, and also too, with that, there may be some effort on our part working through that. Now, clubs is a suit for me that can represent frustration. So if we're getting some news or messages, it may be frustrating to receive that message. It may be on the receiving end, it may cause some frustration, and that would make sense with whip being about conflict and strife possibly. And then we move on to house. House has the King of Hearts. So for me, the King of Hearts can represent the head of a household, could represent a married man, or could represent a loved one, a person that we love and admire, because hearts is all about feelings, emotions, that kind of thing. And the king can represent somebody who is in a position of power, or leadership or authority. So I tend to look at this as like a husband, father, somebody who is loved and beloved and maybe playing a central part. The king of hearts, because another message is coming to me. If that is the case, especially with the idea of conflict or strife, then this person may be wanting to keep the peace. So somebody who's playing this role may be wanting to be the referee, because in the middle of the line could be like literally like I'm the middleman. So somebody may be wanting to do that. If you're going to play that role, then the idea here is about making sure that everybody is heard, right? Because that's how conflicts create and arguments. It's because somebody in the argument is feeling the need to be heard, right? Because raised voices take place in an argument, right? So if you're playing that, play that role very carefully and making sure that you honor every voice that's being spoken, right? Everybody who has a say. And then we move on to the next card. So now we have another king here with the King of Diamonds. So this could just represent for me an entrepreneur. So that fits into the idea of this home-based business, family-owned business, that kind of thing, because of the King of Diamonds. And then rounding out the line, we have the Ace of Clubs. So we have two clubs, and clubs is a suit, again, work and business, putting some effort into a situation, wanting to see something move forward, progress, that kind of thing. And then Ace of Clubs can always represent, for me, something of a legal nature, because this card, Ace of Clubs, can represent documentation and legal paperwork. So again, there may be something that needs to sort out on a legal way or a legal nature, and it may have to do with taxes, property, real estate, mortgages. So on that note, I will end and round out this week's Oracle Outlook. I'm James Himm Mitchell, and as I close, I'd like to thank you for sharing space here with me for this week's reading, and I look forward to sharing the same space with you again in our next video reading together. So until then, I'm hoping that you have a wonderful day, and I'm hoping that you have a wonderful week. Take care.